brother offends you, rebuke him. The Bible also says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's Old Testament, though. In the New Testament, the Lord, when Jesus leaves his disciples, he says, carry a sword. Okay. What do you need a sword for? To defend yourself. Okay. So there are some times when, we turn the other cheek. And there are some times when we have to stand up and defend ourselves. So again, God's not afraid of a fight, and you shouldn't be either. And this passage is all about a fight. This is high, high, what is the political term? Saber rattling here. High saber rattling here. Um, he's Hezekiah, the king, is getting notes. He's getting messengers sent to him. He sees a huge army of probably 200,000 people or more that's coming against his nation. Um, and a very, very powerful and mighty army that's used to winning that's coming against them. But I will say this. Um, God tells Hezekiah to not be fearful, to not be afraid of this fight. And God does not cause us to walk in a spirit of fear. So I like to watch great boxers sometimes, the Mayweathers, the Tyson Fury, the Mike Tyson, even though, a few of those guys are retired at this moment. Um, there's still old clips that I like to go back to sometimes and see how they defend and see how calm they are and poised they are when the whole crowd is shouting. There's thousands of people shouting around them. There's a man in front of them trying to pummel them. He has his coach shouting from his corner, the other coach shouting from their corner, and it's just this huge, huge sea of madness, right, and chaos. And you see these great fighters, Mayweather, Tyson, Fury, Mike Tyson. They are so poised in the ring, um, and they're not afraid. Maybe before they get into the ring, when they're thinking about it at home or walking to the ring, there might be fear. But once they get in and they're doing their business, they seem very calm. They don't seem rattled majority of the time, and they're not running in fear. And I say that because God does not give us a spirit of fear as Christians. That does not mean we should be dumb. That does not mean we should take unnecessary actions or foolish actions. Um, but it does mean that we can be confident in the Lord, and we shouldn't walk in the spirit of fear, because it is a spirit, just like wisdom is a spirit or knowledge. So now we know there's or about 200,000 or more people in the military that's coming against King Hezekiah. But we do see a second miracle in the text, right? The text says that an angel killed 180,000 people. 180,000, okay? And we see that in verse 36. Let me read that again. Then the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. That means he ran, and he returned to Nineveh and stayed there. So this king who was talking so much, as we used to say when we were kids, so much smack or so much head, runs when his army is pretty much burned up, and it shows you how strong he really was. He's running in fear. He wasn't that strong of a guy after all. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Um, the Wicked Witch is not really scary. Um, she's probably scared herself more than you. So, first miracle was food without having to work. That's a miracle. And the second miracle is the angel. The army didn't even have to lift a finger. Think about that. Hezekiah's army, the Lord's army, in human form, didn't have to lift a finger. Now, sometimes God will do things like this for us, and we can view them or view his awesome ability. He doesn't always do it like that, but there were two instances of miracles in this text, and there were several times in this text, when you go home and read it by yourself, hopefully tonight, there were several times in this text, in the book of Isaiah, where we see Hezekiah going to pray for God and going to ask God for protection and going to petition to the Lord. and going to get some of his friends and community to go do the same. So he made repeated attempts, and he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord answered him, which is a wonderful thing. Just like if we cry out to the Lord and are committed to the Lord will come answer us. Now, when all else fails, we can see here, because an army of 200,000, more than 200,000, which is still a sizable army today, but even during this time, an army of more than 200,000 soldiers. When all else fails, the Lord is our defense. Same thing as we live our lives today. We might not be coming against an army, but some people are facing, legal issues in their businesses. Some people are facing health cares issues right now. So the Lord is our defense. Now, money is a defense. Sure, it can be in certain circumstances, but it's not as good as God. Money's not. Taking boxing lessons, we just talked about boxing, is a defense, but it's not as solid as God. You learn how to box, you can defend yourself, but not like God can. Even having a weapon is a defense. I'm sure the military, Hezekiah's military men had weapons, but it's nowhere as great as God. Remember, they didn't have to lift a finger. So when we talk about things like this, when we talk about God and how he defends us and how he listens to our prayers and how he keeps his promises, we have to think about the fact that the Assyrian army was defeated and King Hezekiah didn't have to shoot any arrows. The soldiers, the military leaders that were probably nervous about the upcoming battle with the Assyrians, they didn't have to do anything. God kept his promise. He said he was going to protect them, and he protected them. Okay? He kept his promise. The only arrows, I wrote this down in my notes, the only arrows that were shot were actually words. Okay? So don't let the words and lies of the enemy defeat you. Okay? Because Hezekiah and his army, they could have just surrendered based on words or letters from messengers or, I'll do this to you. I'll do that to you. We'll slaughter you all. You won't be here anymore. The Assyrian king also said, "Do you think your God will really save you?" Sometimes the enemy whispers that into our ears, doesn't he? Do you think your God will really help you get this bill paid? Do you think your God will help your marriage get back on par? Do you think your God will really save your kids? Do you think your God, etc., etc., etc.? So that's what the king of the Assyrians was trying to do. He was trying to rattle their cage, and they could have just surrendered, but they didn't. They waited on the Lord, and he provided, and he kept his promise. So don't let the words and lies of the enemy defeat you. Remember, they're just words. Now, words are powerful, but they are just words. They have to be backed up with action. And then we also get to see what God's going to do on our behalf. Yeah. Next, the next thing I want to get into, when we're almost finished here, and I want to say that while we've already covered that Israel didn't do much fighting, I want to also cover that they stayed silent in the text, especially in the previous chapter. The king of Assyria comes out shouting. He sends messengers shouting. He sends notes saying that they're going to come and destroy King Hezekiah and the nation. But they were told, King Hezekiah told his people to stay silent. All right. I found the older I get, there's so much wisdom I learned in staying silent. If a supervisor's yelling at you, if you and your spouse are going through a hard time, your children may say something not so great to you. You might have some other type of problem trying to get through the airport, or it could be anything. But staying silent, sometimes you have to speak up now, but staying silent is so powerful. I've seen so many issues I've had in the past where something just told me, and that something was probably the Holy Spirit, just said, stay silent. And, a couple hours went by or a day or two went by, and I just didn't respond to the problem, and the problem got fixed. Sometimes some of you all have a neighbor or a friend come and ask you, or a relative that you don't speak to very much, come and ask you for some of your resources, some of your financial resources. And I've heard this story before. They say, "Oh, I didn't respond like immediately. I took maybe like 24 hours or 48 hours to respond." And when I responded, they said, "Oh, they got the money. Everything worked out fine." And nothing happened at all. Um, so things like this, issues like this, solve themselves a lot of the time. So staying silent, there is some wisdom in staying silent. I think one of my favorite writers, not I think, I know Robert Greene, one of my favorite writers, has this quote. He says, "Always say less than necessary." Um, King Solomon in his Proverbs says, "A wise man keeps silent." He even talks about the foolish. He says, "A foolish man who keeps silent is thought to be wise." Have not seen that so many times in my life. I thought somebody was really smart because they weren't speaking in a meeting or something like that. And then when they finally opened up their mouth, I was like, "Oh, you weren't that. You weren't a genius. I mean, you're not dumb, but you weren't a genius. You just kept your mouth shut." So sometimes that's a wise thing to do. Now, while the Israelites are being provoked by the Syrians, okay, as a people, they did nothing. They just kept silent. And we always have to remember that the Lord says, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." Vengeance is mine. I've seen this so many times in my life. I will repay. Now, sometimes God taking vengeance is immediate, especially in my own life. I've seen him take care of my enemies immediately, and sometimes it took years. But either way, he took vengeance, and it was always more impressive what God did to my enemies than what I thought I could have done myself. His is always 10 times more powerful. Um, and sometimes he has a bit of mercy on an enemy you have, and that's